So you're an Indigenous activist and you work for Canadian Roots Exchange, and we're really excited for you to join this conversation. We were just talking about Sir John A. Macdonald and his statue, and some of us feel like it should still be up and some of us feel like it should be taken down. What do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously, you see a lot of activists, people taking some pretty tough stances on both sides of this. It's a conversation that's happening across the country. I think what we need to remember is that, we have to be understanding about where both sides are coming from. This was a guy who created policies that not only started residential school, but also had a policy of clearing the plains through genocide, through starvation, all these sorts of things. I'm not here to tell a particular community what they should be doing with statues. Some want to leave them up as a remembrance for all those horrible policies. Some want to take them down and erect statues of Indigenous leaders or monuments to those who were lost in residential school. I think it's up to each community with their Indigenous populations, their neighboring First Nation community, to have that conversation and figure it out for themselves.
That's actually very fair. I don't think we ever considered the community aspect of it. I think we looked at it overall, but I think you're right. I think it's down to each community and what each community feels. So I wanted to ask you, I am not an Aboriginal person, and I just want to ask you, what's the appropriate terminology? Like Aboriginal, First Nations, Indigenous?
Yeah.
How do I not tread on people's feet here?
Yeah, that's a good question. As long as there's not like a swear word preceding whatever you choose to use, I think that's fine. It's about respect. That's what it ultimately comes down to. There's tons of different terms. Indigenous is probably the most commonplace and the most encapsulating of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. You know what I think? If you're not sure, the best thing you can do is just ask someone, right? I think that's a good rule to run by.
Okay, so you grew up in Saskatoon. I've never been to Saskatchewan.
What?
So what was it like growing up as a native there?
Yeah. That's a great question. I'm repping Saskatchewan tonight. I got my Prayer Lily socks on.
How Trudeauian of you.
What's that?
How Trudeauian of you.
Yeah, totally, right? I'm matching his sock game. Saskatchewan, I love Saskatchewan. I live in Toronto now. I'm a big fan. I get back there as often as I can. I'm like shouting it from the rooftops, from the CN Tower, all this sort of stuff. Gotta go visit. Gotta go, right? Just like any city across Canada, there's challenges, and I did have run-ins with the police that I think were predicated on some stereotypes or some racism, people thinking that I was up to no good. I've been followed around in stores, right? I've had people think, the worst of me based on how I wear my hair or the color of my skin, right? This isn't a problem just affecting Saskatoon. It's right across this country. But that's where I see, the opportunity that exists. We need to have these conversations about the racism, the prejudice that happens in our community. Have some good conversations like you're having today about how we incorporate reconciliation into each one of our cities, and that includes Saskatchewan as well.
Yeah, no, you brought up reconciliation. We can mostly agree. This is one of the biggest discussions that's happening right now. And what I want to really ask you is, where are we right now in Canada? Do you think that we're approaching it, or do you think we're actually starting to go away from reconciliation?
That's a great question. I mean, I think reconciliation is a journey. For Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, we've known each other now for a few hundred years. I always talk about how this is like a relationship, right? When non-Indigenous people first came to Canada, they weren't doing too well. There was a lot of folks who were sick, a lot of folks who were dying. People just didn't know how to live on this land. Native people, we took them in and we said, we're gonna help you feel better. We're gonna treat your illnesses, and we're gonna share the land because there's enough here for all of us. We entered into an agreement or relationship through treaty. But after that, when you're starting to date somebody and they're trying to impress you, they're trying to treat you really well and really nice, all this sort of stuff. That was like Canada, right? Before treaty, we signed treaty, and then you get a little comfortable in a relationship, all this sort of stuff. They stopped treating you so good. Canada went even worse. Canada started treating us poorly, right? And just like any relationship that you're in, as a person, you always want to have a good relationship. You want somebody who knows how special you are, who treats you right, all that sort of stuff. And Canada hasn't been treating Indigenous peoples right for the last couple hundred years. So we're having that conversation right now. I like to say Canada and Indigenous people, we're in marriage counseling right now. You know what I mean? And Canada's trying to figure out how to treat us right again, how to live up to their promises in treaty, in that agreement, and how to create that special relationship that we first envisioned when non-Indigenous people came here, of respect, reciprocity, and mutual benefit. That's what we need to get back to, and I believe that Canada can do that.
Mm-hmm. Throughout like your activist work, do you ever like feel discouraged?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, there's you know, so many problems facing Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, my community, and communities right across this country. You see in almost every indicator of like poverty, education, healthcare, youth suicide, Indigenous people are facing some pretty dire conditions, right? So of course, you know, it's so easy to get discouraged when you see all of these negative statistics, you know, the news stories over and over and over again. I'm so incredibly hopeful. In my work at Canadian Roots Exchange, I get to talk with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, young people all the time who have hope for this community. You know, there was a survey that was released about a year ago that showed that Indigenous youth, or sorry, Canadian youth, more than any other demographic, believe that meaningful reconciliation can occur in this lifetime. 79% of our generation believe that reconciliation can occur in our lifetime. That's something to be so hopeful about. So even when we see the despair, even when we see, you know, the challenges that our communities are facing, the statistics and the news stories, I'm so hopeful about what we're going to do as a generation, and we're going to move it so much further than our parents or grandparents ever did.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, Layla, you have a question.
So talking on like that reconciliation and moving together, as someone who's not Indigenous, how can I support the Indigenous community and help you guys and move towards that reconciliation?
Totally, yeah. I mean, you want to be a part of this relationship too, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want reconciliation to just come from Ottawa or from governments or from the private sector. I think it's incumbent upon every Canadian, especially every young person, to find what their role is in reconciliation. And it's not just about, you know, reading long reports, or it's not just about, you know, being sad about our history. It's about finding your passion, right? Like, are you interested in sports? Are you interested in arts? Are you interested in politics? Are you finding your interest and then figuring out how to incorporate reconciliation into your passion is so huge. We need to learn about our history. We need to talk about the truth before we can talk about reconciliation. So I think it's also about having those hard conversations in your classrooms, encouraging your teacher to bring in content about residential schools, about Indigenous peoples, talking to your families at the dinner table about these issues, and talking to your peers. What we need as Indigenous folks and non-Indigenous folks as a country is your advocacy and your action to understand what happened in our past and use your voice, which is so powerful, the power of social media, all these sorts of things, to talk about this and get the word out so everyone knows all the work we have to do.
So if this is like a passion of mine, I wanted to go and find out more, where should I go?
Yeah, for sure. There's tons of different resources that you can access. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has so many resources available, whether it's, you know, whether you like to read or watch videos, all this sort of stuff. Lots of different organizations like mine, Canadian Roots Exchange, is promoting opportunities and engagements for young people to have that experience of figuring out what their role is in reconciliation. And honestly, you know, we're the most connected generation ever in our history. Yeah. You can always use our most knowledgeable elder, Grandma Google, to figure out what ways that you can participate in reconciliation.